Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Ben Trading Cards. And we have our guest again in our channel. And his name is Sebastian Nadelle. He's the creator of a new trading card game called Runeslingers The Awakening. So we're going to have a tutorial, guys, for the game components. And this game will be on Kickstarter on May 17th, 2022. So let's welcome Sebastian Nadelle. Hi, Sebastian. How are you?
Hello, everyone. Doing well.
Okay, so please give us some um, description or tutorial about this game. And I've
Sure,
seen that there's concentration zones, ailments, and void pile. So let's take a look at that.
sure. Yep, we'll dive right in. So, you're right now you're looking at one player's field. So each field is comprised of two identical playmats. So essentially, this is your playmat, and an opponent will have an identical one facing them. And there are several different zones on the playmat. So I'll just move the deck over here so I can kind of illustrate what we're looking at. So front and center is your Runeslinger. So the Runeslinger character card is the embodiment of you, the player. So any effects in the game that's target a Runeslinger are essentially targeting you. They're one and the same. And on your Runeslinger character card, you've got several different areas. So here you have the name. I'll just stick that over there. And the name is your character's name. So this is Roman. And then over here, you've got the health. And your Runeslinger, all the Runeslingers start with 20 health. And when they take damage or they lose health from an effect, their health will go down. And when their health reaches 0, their power goes down. So you would go from 5 to 4 power, and then you reset your health back to 20. So effectively, if health loss and taking damage is the only thing that's reducing your power, you have an effective health total of 100. So the next thing is block down here on the bottom right. Each Runeslinger has 4 block, and the block that your Runeslinger has can be increased by effects. So you could play armor trinkets, you can play boons and various spells that increase your block value. And block is used to prevent damage. So if an effect would deal damage to either your Runeslinger's health or the defense of a defense value or of a defense card that you control, you can discard a card from your hand and prevent damage equal to your Runeslinger's current block value from being dealt to that thing that you're protecting. So block value is also very important. Players can choose to completely ignore it, where they're not sort of speccing into increasing the value of their block, or you can heavily invest into increasing your block and build an entire deck strategy around using your block. So on the bottom left here, this is the Runeslinger stance. So each stance is essentially a permanent effect that applies to your Runeslinger throughout the entire game. There's no cost associated with using it. It's just always in effect, and it sort of augments how your Runeslinger plays. So broad swings allows your attack rune spells to target any target. Normally, attack rune spells can only target a Runeslinger, and they'll say that explicitly on the card. So if I can quickly find an example here, there we go. So for example, Glancing Arrow states that it deals 4 damage to target Runeslinger. That means it can only target a Runeslinger. But if you have a card in play like Wooden Hammer in the top right, it has a defense value of 3, meaning that it can be dealt damage and destroyed by damage that exceeds its defense value. So this allows, Broad Swings allows you to sort of uniquely modify all of your attack rune spells that you sling to also be able to target defense cards in addition to Runeslingers. So all of the stances and abilities, which I'll get to next, are double-sided. And that just sort of makes it easier to manage them as card resources. So when you buy the Runeslinger starter set, all those cards will be double-sided. So you can easily switch your stance between games. If you decide that you don't want to play with Broad Swings, you would much rather play with Gearmaster, then you can just flip it over for the next game and play like that. And this one uniquely modifies your trinkets so that they become boons, which protect you from ailments. And it totally changes. Like, these are very game defining abilities. They're really build enabling. and that's kind of how they're designed. So they vary dramatically from the card effects, and they're meant to add unique flavor to the Runeslinger. Same thing with the abilities. So this is the Runeslinger ability. And in the top left, you can see that it costs 2 determinations, that little sort of green glass icon with the 2 next to it. And during your play phase of your turn, you can, spend 2 determinations to use your ability. And you gain determinations when your Runeslinger loses a power. So if I have, for example, if I take 20 damage and I would lose a power, I would move my power tracker down 1, and I would add a determination counter to my Runeslinger. So now I have the resource that allows me to use my ability. So in this case, because it costs 2, I would have had to have lost 2 power and added 2 determinations to my Runeslinger in order to use this. And there are 2 ability costs. There are abilities that cost 1 determination, so you can use them a total of 4 times before you lose the game. And then there are the 2 cost abilities. And of course, these are double-sided, and there are going to be many, many abilities and stances added to the game as we go. So in the booster packs, there will also be additional stances and abilities that will allow you to further change how your Runeslinger plays.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
For the ability and stance, you will set that before the game, right? And you can't change it in between games.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you cannot change it in the game. Runeslingers matches are not played best of 3; they're played best of 1. So if you're playing with your Runeslinger and you set a stance and ability, short of a card effect allowing you to change them mid-game, no, you cannot switch them. Yeah, that's correct. Yep. So next we'll go through the zones. So up here are the concentration zones. And this is where you play the resources that allow you to play cards. So very quickly, I'll just put my deck back and I'll kind of go over what that looks like. So while you're playing once per turn in your play phase, you can set a card from your hand as a face down concentration. So you would just take the card, put it here. This is like an action point. You know, in a board game, if you've ever played a game that has action points, I can basically play 1 rune spell or 1 defense card on this concentration. And cards in the top right of them, so you can see in sort of the top right, there's that 1 followed by that little sort of sun spear icon. That indicates that double stab costs 1 light to play. And in order to create a light, you simply use the concentration for the turn by turning it right, and then you can play double stab on top of it. And once I've done that, if I don't have any more concentrations, I can't do anything else. I can't play any more cards for the turn, so then I end my turn. And as you progress through the game, you'll be building up your resources. You'll be adding defense cards that sort of make your Runeslinger more and more powerful, like weapons and armor, and they will all be played here. So the only type of card that is not played on concentration is a boon. And I'll go over boons now. So in Runeslingers, we use a system of ailments, and these are all the ailments up here. And the ailments are negative effects that can be applied to your Runeslinger in various ways. And when an ailment is put on your Runeslinger, it generally has a negative effect. So for example, if an effect would apply a burn ailment to my Runeslinger, I would lose 2 health because of that burn. And if 3 burn ailments would be applied to my Runeslinger, I would lose 2 health for each of those. And they stack. And you use a dice to track the number of instances of an ailment that are currently affecting your Runeslinger. And boons are unique cards that allow you to basically cover those up. So rage is an example of a boon. So if I had a concentration here and rage was in my hand, I could create a light and I could play rage on the burn because it's a boon. So you can see in the top left, it has that kind of potion icon. And then underneath the card name, it says that it's a boon. that tells me that it can be played on ailments. So now what it's doing is it's protecting me from that ailment. So that ailment's effects no longer apply to me as long as this boon is on top of it. And I get this sort of bonus effect. So Rage, it has the effect that my attack rune spells deal +2 damage, and I have -3 maximum health, meaning that my health cannot exceed 17 because my starting normal maximum health is 20, but now it's 17. So if I were to lose a power, for example, from damage and reset my health would go to 17, not 20. So that's kind of the trade-off of having Rage on your field. So boons and ailments are all played in this zone. You cannot play a boon on concentration. They exclusively interact with ailments. And without going into too much detail about that, because the ailments and boons are very complex, and it's one of the most sort of strategic interactions in the game. You can do a lot of things with boons. Even one turn, you can really dramatically affect the sort of the game state by manipulating boons on players or applying boons to them. This is your deck area here. So your 30 card deck will go here. And when all of the cards in your deck are gone, like they're in your discard pile or in play or in your hand, you will take your discard pile, shuffle it, put it back into your deck, and lose a power.
Mm-hmm.
And I should mention very quickly that for ailments, you can also lose a power by having ailments. Yeah, so at the beginning of your turn, if you have 8 or more ailments on your Runeslinger, you will take 8 of those ailments off, and you will lose a power. And you repeat that for every 8 ailments. So if your Runeslinger has 16 ailments, you would actually lose 2 power and remove 16. And you can mix and match them however you want. So for example, if you had, 4, 4, and 4, so if you had 4 burns, 4 fragments, 4 weakens, you can choose any 8 from among these and remove them. It's totally up to you, but you still have to remove a total of 8.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Why? Who will put an ailment there?
Your opponent.
Your
Generally.
opponent. So
Yeah.
when do you put an ailment?
I'll find a perfect example of an effect that applies ailments. Here's one. So let's look at the example of taunt. So if my opponent played taunt and targeted me, they have the choice of applying 2 weaken ailments to my Runeslinger or targeting me and making me lose all my block. Okay. So let's say they apply 2 ailments to me. I would take this weaken ailment card, I would put it on my Runeslinger, and the ailment card itself represents 1 ailment instance, but because there are 2, I'm going to use a dice. And I'm going to indicate, okay, I've got 2 weaken ailments that have just been applied to me. And if I bring this up, you can see that there are 2 levels. So each ailment has 2 levels. The first level applies for each weaken ailment on me regardless. But the second level applies only when I have 4 or more instances of weaken on my Runeslinger. So in this case, when weaken is applied, I have to void a card from the top of my deck. So I would take a card and put it into my void pile, and I would do that twice because there are 2 weaken ailments being applied to my Runeslinger. So that's how ailments are applied to your Runeslinger. It's always through card effects or abilities. Now there are some cards that can apply ailments to your Runeslinger when you play them, for example, and those can be used defensively. So there is a mechanic function that allows you to block ailments. So for example, if I know that my opponent is playing Debilitate, I could fill my area by applying ailments to myself, with a different ailment type, and I could block that ailment from being applied to my Runeslinger, if that makes sense.
Oh, so that means once you have full four zones complete occupied, your opponent cannot put an ailment anymore, correct?
They can't put a different ailment. So if I had curse on me and they applied 3 curses, I would now go to 4 because I'd have 4 curses on me. But let's say they wanted to apply Debilitate, right? They can't because there are no free areas for Debilitate.
Okay, got it.
So that's kind of in a nutshell how the ailments work. And then of course there are the boons, and boons can be played on your field or they can be played on your opponent. So if I have a boon, I can play it on my opponent's field, and the boon now applies to that player because they control it. So any cards on your field, their effects apply to you, not to, regardless of who owns the card. So a card that you begin the game with in your deck is owned by you, but it's controlled by the player whose field it exists on, if that makes sense. And the reason that boons do that is because, let's say, okay, so rage, it gives me +2 attack. But let's say I'm developing a strategy where I want to reduce the maximum health of my opponent to 0. Because when I do that, they automatically lose. So debilitates, if you have minus, 10 or 12 health from debilitates, your maximum health is 8. It's very easy to lose multiple powers in a turn, because if you have a lot of damage coming at you that has pierce, meaning that it goes through, it's not prevented when you lose a power, there is a great opportunity for an entire strategy to be built around that. So if I wanted to combine that with playing a rage on my opponent's field on a different ailment, they would have -3 maximum health. So that's like putting 3 debilitates on that Runeslinger, because they all stack. So if I have 20 debilitates on me, my maximum health is 0, for example. So boons can be used defensively or offensively, and there are a number of boons that have only offensive effects. So I would put an ailment on my opponent, I would apply an ailment to them, and then I would play my boon on their ailment, and that negative effect would then apply to that player.
Okay, so I question with this debilitate. So it says you have -1 maximum health. So you have 17 here, so that's gonna be 16, right?
Correct. Yep.
And you can only get up to 16, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So if let's say I'm at 2 health and my maximum health is 16, and I take 2 damage, I would lose a power, and then I would reset my health to 16, because that's the maximum health that I can possibly have. Yeah. And if a player has an effect that states that you gain 6 health or something, there's no health to gain, because your maximum health is 16.
And by the way, how do you increase your power?
You can't.
Okay, once your power is 0, then what happens?
That's the end of the game.
Ah, all right.
Yeah. So that's the culmination of all of the different ways that you can lose power. That's the way that you win the game. So you can lose a power from health loss. So once your power reaches 0, you reset your health, and then you lose a power. When you run out of cards in your discard pile, as soon as your deck, as soon as your deck area is empty, lose a power. Then you shuffle your discard pile back into your deck. That's the other way. And then with ailments, at the beginning of your turn, if you have 8 or more ailments, you get rid of 8 of them, and then you lose a power. And you keep repeating that until you have fewer than 8 ailments. Then there are 2 other win conditions that straight out, regardless of your power, you automatically lose if any of these things happen. The first one is if your maximum health is 0, you lose automatically, or if all of the cards in your discard pile and deck are gone. So there are effects that can void cards, so they place those cards into your void pile, and they can be combined anyway, with searing effects, which sear states that if you would sear a card, you take it from your discard pile and put it in, or from your deck and put it in your discard pile. Those can be combined with voiding cards. So you have a combination of cards that are just being removed from the game and cards that are going to your discard pile, so they're constantly churning through their deck. That's one strategy that you can use. So effectively, there are 5 high-level ways that you can win the game, and you can combine them however you like. Some of the best strategies involve a combination of dealing damage, applying ailments, and voiding and searing, because they all sort of happen at once. And a lot of times, you can knock a Runeslinger down 3 power in one turn, because if they're at, for example, maybe 1 health, and they would take damage, they would lose a power. But then if they also had 8 ailments, they would lose a power. And then if their deck was empty, they would lose a power as well. So you can kind of chunk fairly quickly. And because you can only use your ability on your turn, your opponent can deny you the use of your ability by strategically orienting their turn in such a way that you lose 3 power all in one turn. So you don't gain those determinations on your turn, meaning that you can't use your ability. So that's another way to do it too, is you can play sort of the long game where you're strategically building up for a big move that will knock them down like 3 or 4 power in one turn. It's very hard to pull off, but if you design your deck around that, that's another way that you can play.
Okay, so how do you attack?
Sure, yeah. So when everything comes from the cards, so there's no sort of base attack. Everything, all damage is dealt, all effects stem from your deck. So what I'll do is I'll just throw these in together. And we'll do that. And I'll just put this over here. So let's give myself a little bit of a board state here. And I'll draw maybe 5 cards, and I'll set a concentration. I'll set another concentration. So let's say that it's my turn, and I'll expand to show the other Runeslinger now. And I've got a hand of 3 cards here. So I've got a boon, I've got a utility rune spell that's got some effects, and I've got double stab, which is an attack that deals damage. So if I want to play double stab, which costs 1 light, I've got a concentration here. I could just use that concentration to create a light, which is the resource, play it, and then I'm going to declare to my opponent that I'm going to target my opponent's Runeslinger with 6 damage. So double stab is going to target Ava and deal 6 damage to her. So Ava now at this point can decide if she wants to block. So if she wants to block, she would discard a card from her hand and then prevent up to 4 damage because that's her current block value. If she chooses not to block, then all that 6 damage will go to her. So she's going to take a dice and she's going to set her health to 14. So I've got another action I can perform now. So if I wanted to play another card, I can create another light. Yeah, and I can play taunt. And I have a choice because taunt has the keyword choice. So I can choose from either of these 2 effects which one I want to apply. And there is another version of this keyword called fate. And when you play a card with fate, your opponent decides which effect that you use, which is kind of fun. So in this case, I would apply 2 weakening ailments to my opponent.
Yep.
Just like that. And then
so you can just choose any.
Yep. I
of the choose 5, right?
No, it has to be weakened. So in this case, yeah, because it states apply 2 weaken ailments, it has to be weakened. There are cards that allow you to apply any ailment, because then it'll just say apply 3 ailments, and then you choose which ones you want. But taunt is very specific. It states that it has to be weakened, and then of course they would perform weaken's required effect, which is voiding a card, and they do it for each weaken ailment. So there were 2, so they would then void 2 cards into their void pile. So that's kind of an example how like a quick and dirty turn would play out. And then at the end of your turn, all cards that are rune spells that were slung by both players are placed into their owner's discard pile. And then at the beginning of your turn, the very first phase is your ready phase. So you're going to ready your concentrations that you control to create more light and pay for more cards. Yeah, and that's pretty much it for the field. There aren't a whole lot of slots, and that's kind of by design because I think right now there's only 1 card that costs 5. There are no cards that cost 6. And you draw 2 cards a turn at the beginning of your turn. There are, I think, only 2 or 3 sources of card draw in the whole game. And that was done intentionally because I don't like card draw. I like card draw to be naturally from the deck because you kind of don't want to have a situation where players are building their decks in such a way where the best mechanic is always card draw. So the objective here is to build your deck in such a way that it all of the strategies work really well together. And the resource system I think functions extremely well because it keeps the game going. It keeps momentum. But let's say I start my turn and I draw 2 cards and I don't like what's in my hand.
Yeah.
I have the option of passing. So I can either look at a card that I control that's a concentration, as long as it's exposed, meaning that it doesn't have another card played on it. I can choose to draw that card to my hand and then skip my turn. So pass my play phase and not do anything. So that's called passing. And I can also pass, and instead of drawing a concentration, I could draw a 3rd card from my deck. So the cards that you play as concentration are not locked. They're not set and you can't get them back. They're basically just there as long as you need them to be there. And if you want to pass, then you can, pick them up and draw them. Or if an effect says return a concentration to your hand, you could get, a concentration back that you can then play as, the card that it is. So a lot of people, when they initially look and they say, well, I don't like this because I don't get to play with the cards. Not true. And especially when you're starting the game, there will be cards you draw that will be of no use to you in the early game. And rather than have them sitting in your hand doing nothing, you could just play them as a resource and then use them later.
Okay. So on the first start of the game, you will draw how many cards?
So 5. So each player starts 5 to start. And the player who goes first, so after each player draws 5, they will each set 1 card from their hand as a concentration at the same time. So now each player has 4 cards. And that completes setup. And then each player will roll a dice to see who goes first. The player who wins the roll decides if they want to go first or second. The advantage of going first is that you're the first to act, but the disadvantage is that you only draw 1 card on the first turn of the game instead of 2. So if you go first to start your turn, you would just draw 1 card. And then in all subsequent turns, you're always drawing 2 cards at the beginning of your turn.
Okay, 2 cards.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's a simple movements, but it will be like complicated when you get the cards abilities, right? So
yeah, it can get very complex. Yeah, so sometimes it gets complicated when there are triggered effects because certain things cause effects to trigger at the same time. But we've done a lot of work to basically pseudo code the game in the sense that you could programmatically make this game based off of our rules. And it would function perfectly well because the game system knows when certain things happen and what priority they happen in. So for example, if I'm the active player, meaning that it's my turn, and my opponent has an effect that triggers, and I have an effect that triggers from the same event, and that event occurs, I have priority because it's my turn, so my triggered effect resolves and happens first. Then the other player's does. And if an instance occurs where multiple effects I control would trigger at the same time, I get to choose and order them how I want, followed by my opponent. So we have all of these things mapped out, so there will never be a case where you're kind of like, well, what happens in what order? It's very clear. Like we really took a lot of time to go through the order of operations for effects because competitive play relies on these things being clear. So right now we've got a rule book it's a basic rule book, but it does certainly teaches you how to play. And we're working on the advanced rules, which will be the tournament legal rules that will be published on the website sometime within the next month to 2 months. And those will basically be, the full 30, 40 page Monty of all the very unique rules sort of in bullet form. So there's no ambiguity about, what happens in certain situations.
Guys, I hope you comment down below what's if you have some questions, and you can go to the community of Discord, and Sebastian will answer that for you. So thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye, Sebastian.
Take care.
Bye, guys.